The show that we worked on together is a play called Punch, which was written by James Graham.
To have been able to work with Anna and work on a show that was so meaningful and really felt like we were doing important work, and then it carry on for so long. Like, you obviously, what's so special, one of my favourite parts of the job is you get to go into these places and meet all of like your creative team that you work with, and you build this really special bond as you're working and you're sharing this process, and then the show goes up and you leave. So it's not very often that you get to revisit that with the team, the complete team that you did it with in the first place. So
Tallulah's exactly got the personality I think it takes to be a designer, you know, very, very approachable, very positive towards people.
I feel like I've grown a lot as a designer in the studio, and not just talking about work, just being in a really safe, lovely, warm space with other really strong, incredible women who are doing what they want in life and aren't letting anything else stop them.
You're so dedicated and you know, very, very reliable, and just bring everything to it. So that, you know, you can't ask for more than that.